When I met with other bereaved mothers and just grieving parents, one thing we all share and have in common is that we don't want someone to forget our child. And I think child loss is such a painful experience that society doesn't want to talk about it. So while you experience the loss of a parent or a grandparent, society understands and they're willing to step into that with you. Yet, when you lose a child, everyone's in shock when it happens. So they don't know how to approach that. And because they don't know how to approach that, they don't step into it. And when people around you don't step into it, it's an even more isolating space.
Welcome to the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. I'm Michelle Perda, mom of three, wife, marriage coach, and host of this show. I help couples move from reactive patterns to intentional partnership using my connected partnership framework so you can feel more connected, supported, and get back to feeling like an us again, all while raising kids. If you've ever felt like you and your partner keep having the same arguments on repeat, or like you've slowly become more like roommates than partners, you're not alone, and your marriage is not broken. The truth is, most couples were never taught how to navigate conflict, communicate effectively, or build a strong partnership. And that's exactly what we do here. Now let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Marriage and Motherhood Podcast. So today we're going to talk about something that unfortunately a lot of parents have experienced, not something that we ever wish on anyone, and that's grief, specifically child loss. So I do want to add trigger warning for those of you listening. If you are not in a place where this is something that you're ready to listen to right now, that is totally fine. Please support yourself in whatever way you need by skipping over this episode, and know that it's here for you if ever you want to check this out at a later time. But I want to throw that out there because we're talking about something that we have not ever covered on this podcast, but it is so essential and so much of a topic that gets kind of glossed over, not discussed. And I know I personally have gone through moments where people have grieved and I'm like, I don't know how to support you, but I know my heart's with you. So like, what's the best way to do this? And so we're going into it today. I'm excited to have my real life friend, Jenny Kim, who is an author of the Grievers and Friends book, which is incredible. And we'll talk more about that later. But I'm excited to have her come on and talk about her book, grief, how to support someone who's going through grief, and all the things that might come up that will be helpful to you and your loved ones. So Jenny, thanks so much for being on this show. I am excited to have a friend here. I've known her for years now. Like, my kids at one point actually went to her husband's pediatric dentist office. So we're going to have a great conversation. You're going to leave this episode feeling more informed and hopefully supported. But Jenny, for those who are new to you, can you please share with them where you live, how old your kids are, and why is grief so important to you, and why did you write the Grievers and Friends book?
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. I've always loved the work that you do, and I think it's so meaningful that you are wanting to highlight this topic of grief and showcase it, because you're right. Many people go through it, and often silently, not just even pertaining to child loss, but in general. Grief is something universal to all of us. My name is Jenny Kim. I live in Northern California in the East Bay. I am a mom of 5. So I have 3 boys and 2 twin girls, and my youngest son, Joey, died at 6 months and 25 days. So the why behind I became an author to the book, Look to the Sky, was stemming from my own grief of losing a child. And I do want to share a little bit background about myself to kind of put this into context as well. For me, my work for nearly a decade was as a pediatric critical care pharmacist. So I am not a stranger to illness and tragedy in the hospital. I just never thought that I would be on the other side, from being a care provider to then being the patient's family. And I've worked at large institutions, academic centers, and seen this and participated in the code response team. I never thought that we would be the one bringing Joey in with ongoing CPR and all the works, and then becoming a PICU patient and having to say goodbye to him. So that's a little bit about how I ended up being an author to a children's grief book. I share more of my story in detail. If you were to follow my Instagram, my grief Instagram account that has all the details of the why is at What Joey Taught Me, and also at Grievers and Friends. So you'll be able to see a little bit more about my story there. But I want to jump into the why behind Look to the Sky. And that really stems from the sibling bond. Joey is my youngest of three boys, and he was just full of love, light, and all things joyful and calm. When I had Joey here on earth, he was the youngest of three, and I basically had three boys aged three and under. So you can imagine it's pure chaos at home. And even in all of that chaos, you would think having the youngest baby would be very stressful, but he was my little sanctuary. He was my calm. Whenever it felt like life was too wild and all over the place, every time I reunited with him to nurse him or to take care of him, he was my safe spot. He exuded so much calm and wisdom, all for being just a 6 month old baby boy. With that, when he died, we had to come home from the hospital and then share with his brothers that Joey's body stopped working. He died and he's not coming home. No one prepares you to have to deliver those words. No one prepares you how to deliver those words so that it isn't confusing to them and so that we can have continued conversations about it. I grew up in a culture where we just don't talk about death. We don't talk about grief. We don't talk about any of those feelings because for some reason, if you were to speak about it, it was contagious. And I imagine other people experience this sort of vibe around death and grief. And because of that, I think it's very hard to show up as supporters when you have a friend that is grieving. So I'm hoping that we can talk a little bit more about that in this episode. So what led to the creation of this book is really just witnessing the sibling bond of Joey's older brothers and how I was supposed to parent through this grief. And I just remember in those early moments of grief, I could not see light. I could not see joy, and I could not see any hope. However, as a mother's love is obviously very strong. I did not want that for my living kids. I did not want them to see that losing a sibling or death was just all things heartbreak and sadness. I wanted them to see a life after loss. And I was trying to find resources that can help hold both of those to be true, grief and love and the life after together. And when I couldn't find that, I decided to write a book so that I can help them through grief and help myself parent through the loss.
That was beautiful. I mean, what a great way to turn such a horrible tragedy into purpose, right? And I think that so many families are touched by what you've done. I know I've read some of the testimonials that you've gotten from people who bought this customizable book for their loved ones or even for themselves as they're navigating child loss. And I know now you have an adult book coming out or already out.
Yeah, the adult loss version of Look to the Sky is already out. I just released that February 6th
Amazing.
of this year. And it's all of this, like Look to the Sky, Grievers and Friend, has been just really a labor of love and grief. I pour all of my grief and love into it now because sadly, when I was navigating this, first I felt very alone. And I also think rightfully alone because I don't think it makes sense for anyone to lose a child. It's every parent's worst nightmare. So while I hated being so alone in this and not being like others, I understood that this is a pain that no parent should ever have to go through. So when I was doing this grief work, because I needed to parent my kids, people reached out to me and expressed that there was a need for something that can speak to losing an adult, losing a parent, because as you know, adults are supposed to go first, and there was a loss surrounding that. There are parents that go too soon, grandparents that go too soon. We never have enough time with the people we care about, and I wanted to support them through that as well. So with all of this, I guess, interests for a customizable book centered around the loss of an adult, we were able to create that as well. So while it started with a book that centered around child loss, it has now expanded to support adult loss, and we have since then also expanded to support the community. What led to my current edition that I'm working on? It's called the Community Edition of Look to the Sky. It's launched on Kickstarter right now that runs April 23rd, 2026 until May 23rd, 2026. And what led to that was when I was speaking to hospitals and grief organizations, we wanted to support people on the masses, but the reality of the custom edition of the book is that it's print on demand, so the pricing is not sustainable for systems to adopt it at scale. And I think it comes with such an important message to walk people through grief as they're navigating a life after, and it also supports the friends that are try to show up for them. When they read this book, they're going to walk away with different ways of looking at grief besides just the sadness. And I hope that that gives them more confidence to talk about grief from the perspective of love. And I think for that reason, I thought it was so important to have a community edition of this book. The community edition of this book being launched on Kickstarter, the hope is for it to be funded to do mass production. And when we can do that, we can lower the price point and then offer it to a wider range of organizations who support grieving families and even the friends who want to show up to support them. So yes, we have the child loss book that was launched on Joey's Angelversary last July 23rd. We now have the adult loss customizable Look to the Sky book that was launched February 6th of this year. And we are running the Kickstarter to launch the community edition of this book. Kickstarter ends May 23rd, and we hope to have the book in hand by October of 2026. So that's what we're doing now.
So exciting. Now, if you visit the Kickstarter page, you'll notice that the goal has been met, but please do not hesitate to contribute if this purpose, this mission is calling to you, because it will only allow Jenny to expand its reach, right? You'll be able to see in the
Thank you.
Kickstarter her many different reach goals, like having a Spanish version, or again, lowering the cost to allow this to get into more hands and support those who are really in need of this type of support that has never existed before. Now, with that said, I kind of want to go into grief. So, can you
Mhm.
share for those who fortunately have not experienced grief,
Mhm.
particularly child loss? Because I think we can all kind of get our heads around grieving people who are meant to go during their time, right? Like old age. Um, but when it comes to child loss, this is obviously not something that happens that we expect. It's not something that anyone should have to experience. So, what was that experience like for you? And also, what did you notice that was something that you and other grieving parents had in common that you want other people to know?
Yeah. I think that's a very good question. And, I worked in the hospitals and pediatric hospitals, so I saw children die and I met families that have experienced this loss. Yet, even though I was in that space for almost a decade, it did not prepare me at all for my own loss and for such a deep loss, such as losing your child. I would say in grief, when I met with other bereaved mothers and just grieving parents, I think the one thing we all share and have in common is that we don't want someone to forget our child. And I think child loss is such a painful experience that society doesn't want to talk about it. So while you experience the loss of a parent or a grandparent, society understands and they're willing to step into that with you because they understand that that is true. Yet when you lose a child, it is such an out of order experience that everyone's in shock when it happens. Even though we know it happens, everyone's in shock that it happens. So they don't know how to approach that. And because they don't know how to approach it, they don't step into it. And when people around you don't step into it, it's an even more isolating space. You feel all the feels as a parent already. And the feelings for me that I experienced is that I felt totally like guilty, shame, because my job as a parent is to keep my child safe, and I couldn't do that. So not only was I grieving the loss of my child, but I had all of these very negative feelings about myself. I felt like I was unworthy to be around others. I felt like I was unworthy to have this life. I just felt totally like I couldn't be around anybody. So when you have that and you feel so alone, and then your friends around you or the people around you are in a way too scared to step into it with you, it's an added feeling of loneliness. And I would imagine that families like me, we just want people to show up for us. And we may not know how to express that. And we may push you away. We may be angry. We may be all the different feelings all at once. But the core of it is that we're going through something so devastating that we don't even know what to ask for ourselves. So showing up really is the best thing you can do for someone in grief. And what does that even mean, showing up, right? That doesn't mean like, hey, let me know if you need anything. I mean, we don't know what we need for ourselves, and we're definitely not going to know what to ask you for. So really showing up is action, any kind of action. It's, some of the things that I really valued for grief support is I remember some of my friends, like they would just show up and drop off groceries at the door. And they didn't know what I needed. They didn't know what was in my refrigerator. They probably knew I needed something, and they just went and got it for my family anyway. Some people would send gifts to my living children because they probably imagined that me and my husband were totally distracted with funeral planning or just making calls or just doing all the logistics or just how figuring out how to get out of bed. So they would just send toys just so that the kids had something to open, even when we couldn't think about how to help them through grief. It's all of these little things, like even sending a message of like, hey, I'm thinking of you. I may not have the right words to say, but I'm with you. You do not have to respond. And all of these little ways of sending love is everything. These are the little moments that I still hold on to. These are the moments of kindness and compassion that when I look back on my early days of grief is what got me through the early days of grief. And it may feel like not anything big on your end, but when we are at our lowest of the lows, we appreciate and remember all of the different ways that people decide to step in it with us. And that even means like showing up and just sitting with us. We're not going to be in a space to entertain you for anything. We'll have nothing ready, nothing. But for you to be able to step in knowing that we have honestly nothing to offer and just sitting with us while we cry, sitting with us while we retell our stories over and over again, that is everything. And that is in that witnessing of our pain is how space opens for us to begin to see a light, a life, and some glimmers again. So we just really appreciate the patience when it comes to the grief and speak of our child. Say their name. Tell us your favorite memory of them. Ask us our favorite memory of them. We want to say it all because if you think about it, when we lose our child, while everybody else has the opportunity to share about their achievements and share about all these cool things that they did, all we have are the memories left. And we would love to be able to share that time and time again. And we would love that you aren't afraid for us to cry when we share these memories, for us to have these negative feelings. Like sit with us. Because at the end of it, when you show up for us, it's really not about you. It's really about us and our grief and just holding space for us. That's what we hope for. And yeah, and child loss is a scary thing. It's scary for everyone. It's every parent's worst nightmare. So while it's uncomfortable to walk with us in it, I would really ask to imagine what it's like for us to live it. And we hope that you can spare your moment of discomfort and know that that is something we feel every day. So, very grateful that you asked that question because I think coming from my grieving heart, I want to share that with others so that we can show up better for each other.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people, because of their upbringing, are not comfortable with the uncomfortable, especially when
Hmm.
it comes to emotional stuff, right?
Yeah.
Societally, it's very like, let's just keep things light. Like,
Hmm.
how are you? But I don't actually want to know how you are.
Mm-mm.
Like that question irks me.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and when it comes time to having someone that you care about that is grieving, and you're like,
Hmm.
shit, I don't
Yeah.
know how to touch this. I would
Yeah.
rather not touch this, but I want to be a good friend. Is there anything that you found to be helpful for people who are wanting to learn how to sit with this discomfort, but they're scared, right?
Yeah.
They're scared of many different things, not showing up the right way, saying the wrong thing, or just like scared of feeling uncomfortable with the
Yeah.
depths of all the feelings that come up with grief, like maybe even being afraid of crying in front
Yeah.
of you when it's not even them that has experienced the loss.
Yeah.
Is there something that you can share to address that?
Yeah, there's so much. I feel like we can talk about grief for hours. I actually became a certified grief educator, and, it was a 12-week course. And I felt like even after that, there's so much. So I'm going to try to share as many like practical tips as I can within our allotted time here. But first, I want to say I didn't know how to show up for someone who was grieving such a deep loss until I went through it myself. And even though I've gone through it myself, I'm not perfect at showing up for people in their grief. So I think first, if you're scared to show up for someone in grief, that's okay. It's totally valid. I'm still scared to show up for someone in grief, even though I've experienced my own deep grief. So first, give yourself grace. We're not going to be perfect about anything in our lifetime. And I think as soon as we understand that and accept that and we give ourselves grace in the trying, I think that is enough. So first, I want to validate that feeling and normalize that feeling. It's not natural for anyone to have to support someone through a tragedy like this. And I would say one of the things that in my grief reading and in all the different conversations that I had, the one thing that sticks to me as a nice tip is something called the ring theory. Now, ring theory, it's not like a scientific, evidence driven type of technique, but I think it's very easy to remember. So I'm going to describe the ring theory for you. And basically, ring theory, I want you to imagine a series of concentric circles. So bigger circle, smaller circle, and a smaller circle in that. In the ring theory, the person who's in crisis or in deep grief is at the very center of that circle. So all you have to remember in this ring theory is that you comfort in and you dump out. How that works is basically if you're in that circle. So let's just say for me in my situation, I lost Joey. Joey died. I'm the parent in crisis. The circle around me would be, let's say, the siblings or grandparents or extended family. And then outward to that are like colleagues and acquaintances. So what you would do is if you're in the outer ring, your job is to comfort inward. So, for example, I would imagine like my siblings who know that I've gone through this, they will comfort in. They would see, let me see how I can help you. Let me take this off your plate. Let me do that. They themselves are probably grieving as well. And they themselves are probably, very overwhelmed with their responsibilities and supporting me. But their job isn't to share those fears inward with me. Their job is to vent outward. So they would essentially dump out to the circles outside of them. So, if they have colleagues that they turn to, their own friends, they can vent and dump out all of their worries about this situation to them. So think about ring theory. You comfort in and you dump out because oftentimes when we're all in a state of shock and not knowing what to do, we have our fears and we unknowingly share that onto the person who is grieving. They're barely holding on to their life and how to manage their grief. It's extra heavy when they then have to shoulder, the grandma's grief or a friend's grief, the best friend's grief, or something like that. So, really think about the ring theory when you decide what to say to your person, because you're right, you're not going to know what to say. But when you know about the ring theory, you'll know at least, okay, if this is fitting in the worry category and it's not comfort, let me save that for somebody else that is not the person grieving. And then when we talk about like, what to say. Because you're right. We don't want to say the wrong thing. We don't want to say something that adds weight. And at the same time, I do not want that fear to prevent you from saying something or from prevent you from showing up for them. Just remember, it's not going to be perfect. Give yourself grace. And as long as you're willing to accept that you're not going to be perfect, you are going to try, you're going to learn, and you're going to be everything your friend needs. For example, some of the things that my friends have said to me when they didn't know what to say was, I'm not going to have the right words, and I may even say the wrong words. I want to show up for you anyway. So please tell me if what I'm saying is not helpful. I'm going to keep trying. And I want you to know that I am here for you and I want to show up for you. Even acknowledging that, puts your grieving friend at ease that, okay, yeah, like they're not going to know what to say, but they're trying their best to show up for me. And then with that said, with the same token, like give your griever so much grace. They are overwhelmed with all the feelings. And, even when you come with the kindness of hearts, they may respond to you in the sharpest of tongues. And it's just because they're carrying so much pain. So give yourself grace in how you approach, but also give them grace in how they respond. And when you understand this, I think it makes approaching the topic and supporting your friend a lot more lighter for yourself and hopefully for them. Something else I also want to address too in terms of asking questions like the how are you? You mentioned how are you is such a default question we ask everybody. And it comes with a default answer because I'm sure we've all done it. Someone says, "How are you?" You're like, "I'm fine." But the reality is for a griever, we're not fine. So when you ask a how are you question, I think chances are they're not fine. But then now they feel guilty for saying I'm fine because that was their default when they're actually not fine and they're awful. They're feeling terrible. I think one of the fixes to how are you question, because you generally do want to know how they're doing, you add a time element to the end of that how are you question. So you're like, how are you this morning? How was this morning for you? Then it helps your griever like narrow down. Okay, it's not as big of a question. I don't have to go through all the feels that I've been feeling. I can focus on how am I right now? Right now, it sucks. Or right now, I'm actually okay. Like I'm not crying. Like you give them the permission to answer truthfully that state of mind that they're in this moment. So I think that's a quick fix for the how are you question. And then being scared to approach someone, like what you need to consider in terms of the ring theory, and then also giving yourself grace and giving the grace in the response that you're going to get. Because I can tell you, upon reflection, right now I'm about close to 4 years out this July from losing my child. When I look back in that first year, my tongue was so sharp. Like I had zero F's to give. I did not care about what I said and who it was going to push away because I already lost my child. And if I had to say goodbye to my child, I was ready to say goodbye to any other relationship that was in front of me that was not serving me in my mental capacity and space. And upon reflection, I am like so grateful that some of those people are still in my lives today because I was a very emotional griever, a very loud griever, and you're going to be met with all sorts of different kinds of grief. There's no quote unquote right way to grieve. There's no template or blueprint to understand what type of griever you have in front of you. You may have a loud and mighty and fearless griever, and you might have one that is totally not going to talk about their grief at all. They're totally like walls up, not saying anything. And then you're going to have some practical grievers. Like they understand grief and they just kind of carry on with life. They keep working, they keep doing a bunch of things to quote unquote distract themselves from the feelings. And it's going to be such a huge spectrum. So you never know what you're going to get, which is why for me, even though I've gone through my own deep loss and I understand how I like to grieve, I don't know if I know how to show up perfectly for the next person that I'm going to talk to in their grief. And you try anyway. You understand that there's a depth of pain, and your job as someone supporting their griever, if you choose to do it, if you have capacity to do it, is to be present and listen and show up the best way you can in that moment and give yourself grace if you're not perfect.
Oh
I
my
said a lot.
gosh. That
Yeah.
was great, though. That was very, very helpful for those who have no clue how to be there for someone. And even that quick change of, like, how are you this morning? That kind of reminds me of, like, how kids can kind of be very general. What is the word? Like, generalistic is not a word, but I think you know what I mean. When they
Yeah.
have like a bad moment, right? And they're like, today's the worst,
Yeah.
and then you ask them how are they feeling, they think about it from like a whole grand view rather than zooming in
Yeah.
on something more specific, so that you can kind of add to the, I guess, not
Help them find
having
the
it.
language to answer
Yeah,
that question.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like when someone's grieving, that can kind of help show them that there are glimmers, and not every
Hmm.
moment of their life right now is all
Hmm.
doom and gloom, right? There are
Hmm.
moments where there's degrees of grief. It's
Yes.
not full on 100% 24/7. You go through waves,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a
And,
good reminder to that person that maybe right now you're in a wave where it's like at its peak, and maybe
yeah.
you're at the bottom of it.
And I love that you mentioned that because that brings me to something else that I want to talk about. Like our society in general is very uncomfortable with
Mm-hmm.
negative news, discomfort, or
Yes.
just sadness and people crying. Um, and because of that, I think naturally society falls into the trap of bright siding everything or silver
Mm,
lining. So some of the things
dismissing.
not to say, yeah, some of the things not to say, since we're at this, is everything happens for a reason.
Oh
Don't say it.
gosh.
Whatever you do, just don't say it. Not in the setting of loss of life. Like, let's say there's other, I guess, inconveniences or obstacles or challenges that come along in life that's not pertaining to loss of life. Okay, maybe you can do everything happens for a reason in those settings. But for sure, when it comes to loss of life, do not say everything happens for a reason. Other things that don't land very well, it's all part of God's plan or it's all part of the universe's plan. Don't do that, because in what reality does it make sense that your child had to die, that your person, spouse, whoever that you're not ready to say goodbye to, in what universe is it acceptable that they were part of that plan? Right. So
Mm-hmm.
there are certain things that just don't land well in the setting of loss of life. And those are definitely two things not to say. And if your desire to say something in grief support, start with at least, abort mission. Do not say whatever you were about to say that started with at least. Like, that's all part of the bright siding. And grievers aren't sometimes aren't ready to hear it yet. It's funny that you talk about, the glimmers and things like that. I do believe the goal of grief is to eventually see the
Mm-hmm.
glimmers. And the goal of grief isn't that it ends or that it disappears. The goal of grief is that we can somehow hold the grief with us in life and to remember it with more love than pain. And that takes a long time, and it could be fast for some people, but the reality is it could take an eternity. It can take all of their lifetime, and they may still not get to that. Your job as someone supporting someone in grief is to walk with them for however long it takes until they can see it for themselves. So while you have these conversations, while you understand that there is a life, it's not your job to tell them that those glimmers are here right now. They, as a griever, will get to that they will get to it with the compassionate grief support around them, the kindness and the grace. Hopefully they will eventually get to that, but it's not really for anybody else outside of the griever to tell them it's coming. You just have to hope that you listen to their pain, witness their pain, and in time they will find it for themselves. So that's something to think about when it comes to these grief waves. Like, it's going to come crashing. I think it's like a cyclone. Sometimes I describe it as like, today you wake up and you get thrown in a blender. What are you going to feel today? You might feel all of it blended inside. You might just be one flavor. It might not ever kind of dissolve with each other. We just never know what it's going to be. Today I might feel that I can see glimmers, and tomorrow I might not. In this moment, I might see glimmers, and then a minute or two later, I might not. So it's very dynamic, and that's the wild thing I've also understood about grief, is that it is an everlasting feeling, but how it appears or manifests or shows up transforms, and it can transform from pits of despair, so much anger, or to lightness and the ability to see joy, the ability to smile and laugh and want to see people. All of those things are shapes of grief. And I truly believe grief is really a form of love. And if we can somehow approach it in this way, I think a lot more people can eventually find the glimmers when they're allowed and they're given permission to grieve however long they want to, and they don't have to get over it. They don't have to have an end. They don't have to have closure. And that understanding that their grief is an evolution of all the different things that they will experience in life, and that permission for it to be carried for a lifetime, I think that will give people more space to receive the light in the life again.
Yeah, I mean, just from a emotional support, emotional connection standpoint, we never want to rush someone through their own emotional journey, whether it's something as, you know, regular as someone being upset over something, like
Hmm.
your child over getting a red cup over a blue cup,
Yeah.
or someone experiencing grief. We have to allow people to go through their own journey and decide when they're ready to look for the glimmers or experience the glimmers. And I once saw something like many, many years ago about how we can view grief. And it's kind of like the talk about capacity. Like if you've been
Mm-hmm.
here for a long time, you know I talk about capacity and how it changes throughout the hour, the day, the season of
Yes.
life that you're in. And so with grief, grief doesn't shrink or get bigger. Our capacity to handle it shrinks or
Agree.
grows. And
Totally
so
agree.
that's how we can kind of explain how grief doesn't ever go away, but sometimes on certain days or seasons of our life, we can handle it better. In some seasons, it just feels like it's overbearing because it's taking up most of the jar that we have
Yeah.
that is called our capacity. And so, if you are new to this metaphor, hopefully that can help you understand it better in terms of how to, I guess, respond to people who are giving you varying levels of interactions when they are grieving, and not to take it personally, right? This is
Yeah.
about them and their journey. It's not about you. And sometimes it's just how it is. Like,
Yeah. I
that's
love that.
just where they're at.
I love how you summarize that. Like that is so perfect that you are able to share it in that way. And I'd have to say, honestly, I come with quote unquote this wisdom now. First, it's wisdom I never asked for, and at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, we were never taught this. So you have to give yourself grace, right? Like it's wild to think that for something as universal as the experience of grief in someone's lifetime in one form or the other, whether it's loss of life or loss of relationships, loss of jobs, and loss of all these things, we were never taught this in school. Like I would hope it would be nice if one day they have the topic of grief and life things in school, like even from a early age in elementary school, middle school, high school, and at each stage of our life, they speak to it that is age appropriate, that's easy to digest. Can you imagine the kind of humans we can become if we talked about grief, if we talked about emotional intelligence or just emotions and understanding the human condition or the human being in all our different shapes and forms and capacities, how we can better show up for each other, right? So if you're navigating grief now or supporting someone in grief, really, we were never taught this. So of course we're still learning. And I want you to embrace that we're lifelong learners in this way. No one person is created the same. No one person experiences all the same things, even within the same family. So, of course, our grief is going to be different. And of course, how we speak about grief, how we respond to grief and grief support is going to be different. I love that you highlighted the whole capacity aspect because it is so true. Yeah, I just remember in the early days of grief, I had no capacity to do anything but grieve. And I didn't even know I was grieving. I knew I was very sad, but I had no labels and understanding to what it was I was experiencing. And I haven't even heard about the stages of grief. So I didn't learn about the stages of grief until I think I went to a PCP appointment 3 days after Joey died. And I just went to a routine scheduled appointment because I was on autopilot. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing, not supposed to be doing. I was just showing up because I thought I was just supposed to carry on with life. So I went to my PCP appointment and I shared with them that my son died 3 days ago. And of course, they were very shocked and probably shocked that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And they spoke about the stages of grief. I had not even heard of the term stages of grief. I didn't know what the stages of grief were. I ended up going home and I was Googling it, stages of grief. I think it's like, I should know this by now, but I'll tell you, grief brain is another thing. So it's very easy to forget things. But the stages of grief includes denial, bargaining, anger. I think acceptance was in there. And then, of course, depression. I think those were the main stages, but it came from Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a psychiatrist, and it was discussed in her 1969 book on death and dying. And the premise of that book was really talking about how the patients in the book or the people in the book were navigating their own terminal illness. So if you think about the 5 stages of grief in that setting, it made sense because they knew they were going to die and they had to, I guess, get to the point where they accept it. But over the course of the years, people take bits and pieces and they evolve it into their own understanding. And somehow the 5 stages of grief were adopted to the setting of bereavement. And because of that, there's this misconception and of understanding grief, that you would navigate each grief and somehow you would be done and then you would accept it and the end. But that is absolutely not true. I think it's because there are nuances, right? Whenever you're interpreting things that you read, and people take it and they run with it, and then, we don't get formal education on it. So, of course, we don't know how to digest the information that's presented for us, right? So, I was one of those where I was told about the stages of grief. I didn't understand the context and background of the stages of grief, especially having it been initially discussed in the setting of terminal illness. So I ran with the stages of grief of like, okay, first I'm going to feel sad, and then I'm going to feel mad, and then I'm going to bargain about the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and then somehow I will accept
Like
that
you graduate through
grief
each
is done.
level.
Yes, I
Yeah.
somehow thought this is the end, I will be done. And that is like a huge misconception. That's a huge myth. Stages of grief was in the setting of terminal illness, but those feelings and those emotions are still true in the setting of bereavement. Now, in the setting of bereavement and grief, I would say these stages actually cycle. They come back and forth, they repeat, and there truly is no end. You're like a big ball of all of those stages in any given moment. So, stages of grief, and like Grief 101, stages of grief exist in a setting of terminal illness, but when applied in a setting of bereavement, understand that there is no graduation to your grief. There does not have to be a graduation to your grief. It can continue and persist for however long it feels right to your process.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's basically just learning to live with it.
Yes, learning to live with it. And we were never taught that. So we're
Mm-mm.
all just trying, we're all just doing the best we can. And that's the wild thing when I think about grief. We're all walking around really probably carrying some level of grief, some
Mm-hmm.
grief pertaining to the loss of life, some grief pertaining to the loss of relationships or a vision that we had for ourselves. So we're all carrying this weight that society doesn't really want to talk about, right? Like we only want to talk about the happy things. So when someone feels vulnerable enough to share the heavy times, we don't know how to respond. And you're not alone in that. I still feel that way sometimes too, and I have to switch my brain a little bit. So give yourself grace in how you show up in life, and have the understanding and the compassion and the empathy to know that while you struggle, other people are also struggling. So if you can afford an ounce of kindness, or if you can afford to, in a reactive state, to choose curiosity over criticism, that could be everything for that person in that moment. I still remember the acts of kindness I received. I mean, I still remember after I lost Joey and I went grocery shopping for the first time. I, I, I felt like an infant in a giant store, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And I had this awareness of like, oh my gosh, I am in a store. I just had my child die. Am I supposed to go grocery shopping? Like, am I supposed to look for bread? And then all these other activating moments happen because you're like, I would normally buy pouches. I would normally buy teething crackers. And now I'm not doing that. So there's people walking around just trying to grocery shop in a state of true confusion and shock, trying to figure out how they're supposed to integrate grief into their life and carry on with regular human functions. And when you know that that is potentially anyone that you're interacting with, if you have the capacity, please choose kindness, please choose curiosity. and and I think if we can approach life in that way, people will feel a lot more supported. I remember on that day, I was checking out at the grocery store, and people are just doing their regular jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to be kind, they greet you, they say have a nice day. I remember when the cashier said have a nice day to me, it felt so refreshing. It felt like lightness. It felt so bright. And it is something as simple as someone doing their regular job of saying, have a nice day. And it was said in such a warmth and almost like just lightness, and maybe a little bit like naive that there's like darkness around us or whatever. She was just so
Mm-hmm.
pure in how she said, have a nice day, that I felt it and I needed it in that moment. Something just so simple as that. I still remember it nearly 4 years out. And that carried me through to the next moment when life felt impossible. Like truly, moment by moment, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, like we can walk with each other through these things. And I hope that that's what we choose to do. And I say all these things with all this wisdom and all these things, but let me tell you, I'm not perfect either. I do not approach every interaction with kindness, compassion, and grace. I am a petty person, like through and through, inside. And in grief, sometimes it's super magnified. And sometimes I think about my little Joey and how he would not want his mother to be like a crazy, angry person. And I think about him and what I miss most about him. And I channel that into restraint for those times when I feel totally angry, totally petty, totally sharp. I think about my person and what I miss most about them, and I try to channel that in my everyday actions. So in the good in me these days, I feel like all the goodness is because I remember Joey and how he brought me so much light and love, and I want to honor him in my day-to-day interactions and how I leave people. I really hope I leave people with more light, joy, goodness, and kindness, and it's everything of what Joey taught me, because trust me, I have those moments where I am absolutely not kindness, compassion, and grace. I don't have capacity for it. And I am hopeful in those moments that people give me kindness, compassion, and grace. Yeah.
I love that. I do actually have one more question because you had mentioned the ring theory. So, with the ring theory, I had thought of something. You had mentioned, comfort in and dump out. So, in relation to the people that are like one ring out, right? Like family, close
Mm,
friends. Now, you had mentioned, you're supposed to tend to the person who's in the center of the grief, right? And then not show or burden that person with, whatever it is that you're dealing with. And that kind of made me think, what about the isolating part of feeling like you're grieving alone? Do you not want to know that they're also grieving?
that's a good question. So in terms of like the one layer out and showing and the feeling of like loneliness, there's all these things with grief and grief support. I feel like there are nuances. So, for example, for me, when I was grieving and I was sad and I was crying and all of those things, what was actually helpful for me was when I saw emotions in others. So, actually, when I saw people cry when I tell the story, when I saw people tear up when I tell the story, for me, that was very comforting because I knew how unimaginable and painful my grief is. When I see it touch others, it validated how terribly awful this pain is that even others are crying for me. So for me, I'm a griever that appreciates that. Now, there are grievers that, let's say, in their own pain and they're grieving and they're crying, when they see other people crying, it's hard because it depends on their personality. If there are people like if they're a people pleaser or if they're also a perfectionist, they feel like they then have to tend to their needs. And then that kind of becomes internally for them something heavy. So there are these nuances, and like I said, like when you show up for grief support, you're not going to be perfect for everybody. Just understand that there are two different responses to someone else's grief in the one ring out. For me, I actually really appreciated seeing people sad and like sad about my loss. Like I didn't see it as like a pity. I saw it as like, hell yes, my shit is sad as F. Like, and you're allowed to be sad with me. I appreciate that. That made me feel less alone. There are others that may respond to your response to grief as like, oh, now I have to then comfort you when I'm super sad. It's about me being sad, not you. So it's very tricky. And again, this
Mm-hmm.
goes back to like there's no right way to show up for someone. Your griever is going to be different, and just understand that there could be multiple responses in your attempt to support them in grief. Now, with that said, for the one ring out, of course they're going to be sad. I remember when my mom was very sad because my mom was one of the caretakers for Joey when I was back at work. So they spent a lot of time together. I would say I spent the most time, and the number two who spent the second amount of time was my mom. So I remember when I was in the PICU with Joey and I was super sad, my mom would be crying and my mom would be like, this is my grandson too. I had no capacity to care about her saying that this is her grandson. So my sister was so amazing. She stepped up and I told my sister that. And I was like, dude, mom's making it about her right now. It's about me and my sadness. Like, I just can't. So my sister, she went and helped my mom talk to my mom, and she was like the rational one, like, she was able to explain it in a way that was less emotional than me because I was about to like tear her a new one. And that's so unfair, right? Because as a mother losing a child, it's the worst pain. But can you imagine? Now I can imagine, then I could not. Can you imagine a mother seeing their baby navigate a pain that they can't fix for them either? So there is so much grief wrapped into all of that. And I was at no capacity to see that side. And in that moment, my sister did the Lord's work, the universe work, and she was the person that helped me in the early days of grief and also helped my mom. And I'm sure that was a lot for herself to carry. So I hope she had support through that. And I wasn't at a capacity to check in on her. Did she have support? I just had to trust that she did and that she was a grown person, and she knew she had someone to reach out to in that moment. And yeah, like the ring theory, it's simple, like comfort in, dump out, but there are nuances, and it's about just learning. And the
Mm-hmm.
great thing about these days, like, we're in a world of AI, right? Like, I highly recommend, if you don't know what to do for someone in grief, or even, I wouldn't say if you're navigating your own grief, if you're a griever, because there's nuances to that. But if you're someone supporting someone through grief, look things up online. Ask ChatGPT, ask other, or go to certain organizations like the Compassionate Friends. Like, there are a lot of resources out there. When you Google, these organizations come up and they can provide support for you. And if it's a lot to digest, we're in an AI world that can help you synthesize that information. For the grievers, I what I found is helpful. I do a lot of therapy. Therapy works for me. Therapy may not work for everyone. uh, Additionally, if you start therapy and you find that it's not a good fit, it doesn't mean therapy as a whole doesn't work for you. It might just mean you need to find a therapist that is a better fit. I would advise against using AI and ChatGPT and all of these things for yourself as a griever, because you've seen a lot of things in the headlines. Like, ChatGPT and AI has a mind of their own, and it's not always positive, even though they seem like they're encouraging you because they have capability to be encouraging. I would still turn to human support for this, whether it's professional through a therapist, or whether it's a grief support through a trusted organization, or whether it's your friend. So for the grievers themselves, and for someone supporting someone in grief, please recommend human support. That's what I would strongly recommend.
Thank you. Yeah, that was going to be my final question. Is okay, so we've talked a lot about how people can support grievers, but then how can grievers start to turn to receiving support themselves when they feel ready to go back out into the world? So thank you so much, Jenny. Can you share a little bit more about where people can connect with you? I know we had mentioned earlier in the episode, but can you remind the listeners where they can find you, where they can grab the book of yours and support? And then, of course, I'll include the Kickstarter link in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. So you can connect with me through Instagram. I'm not savvy with all the other platforms, but on Instagram, you can find my handle at What Joey Taught Me. I'm also behind the handle at Grievers and Friends on Instagram. My website is grieversandfriends.com. If you reach out that way, it will also be me on the other side. That is where you can find the custom editions of the book, Look to the Sky, that centers around the loss of a child. And you can also find the custom edition of the book, Look to the Sky, centered around the loss of an adult there as well. My Kickstarter also links out from that website, so feel free to check that out. Two, one of the things that I found was very helpful for grief support. Social media has its pros and cons, but I would have to say, when I felt in my darkest of times, I did turn to social media, and I was able to connect with other bereaved parents. And for me, that has been life changing. So that is an option as well. And I'm happy to connect with people or help support you through supporting someone. And I can also send resources out that way if you connect with me through my social media platform. So thank you so much. And Michelle, thank you so much for having me and having these tough conversations and sharing your insights. Please let me know how else I can help you and your listeners. Having gone through this unimaginable pain, my goal and my mission and my passion these days is to really support others so that they can better support each other and that we can show up better. Because I was lucky to have that support, and now I'm doing these projects that I'm hopefully helping others. And I think about how you can impact someone's life and what they can go on and become for the others, for other people around them and their network. So choose kindness when you can, choose compassion and choose grace. So thank you, Michelle.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jenny. All right, listeners. Thank you so much for listening all the way through the end. I hope that you're walking away with more insight and maybe even a little bit more confidence on how to navigate such a tricky situation that is grief, whether it's your own or someone that you know. If you love what you've learned from Jenny, please go connect with her. Again, check out her Kickstarter, support her amazing mission to spread more knowledge and tips on how to handle grief and support others in grief. And then also, if you know someone that could benefit from listening to this episode, which literally I think everyone, please share this episode. Share it in your Instagram stories, tag us so we can say thank you for sharing this. And if you love this show, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you being here. Please consider leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That's what helps the show grow. It helps more people like you get the help that they need. And that's it. I will catch you back here on the next episode. Bye. If you're listening to this and you're starting to see your own patterns a little more clearly, that's exactly where change begins. And you don't have to figure out the rest on your own. I got you. If you want help taking what you're noticing and actually shifting it in your relationship, check out the show notes for next steps to help things move forward in your marriage, whether that's a guide, a masterclass, or booking a clarity call if you're ready for support. Stay tuned for the next episode. See you there.